Hello and welcome to Rosie's Preserving School, and we're moving onwards and upwards. Today we're going to be looking at the world of pressure canning, what it is, why we do it, how it can be done and fit in with modern busy lives. So the pressure canning unit that I have here, I've had for about 15 years, and in the last half of those, in the last 6 or 7 years, it's been used very, very well indeed. Pressure canning of food is primarily to allow us to preserve low acid foods. So we've been up to now with jam and preserve making, pickles, chutneys, and the water bath products dealing with high acid foods. If they aren't high enough, we've added lemon juice to jams, we add vinegar to chutneys and pickles, and that is all to keep the food safe against. We can deal with molds and yeasts and enzymes with those methods, but what we can't deal with is bacteria. Bacteria are all around, they're on everything, in everything, they're naturally there, they're part of our life, they're there for a reason, but we don't want them to proliferate and overwhelm some foods that we've preserved. And in the case of low acid foods, with the absence of the acid, then that is likely to happen. So we have to sort of control it in another way. And the main culprits are things like salmonella, but the main bacteria we're dealing with home-produced food is the Clostridium botulinum. Now, this comes in two forms. And what is all around us on the food that we buy, the food that we grow in the soil, everywhere, and that's not to say we're all grubby. I mean, that is life. There are spores of Clostridium botulinum, and they can be destroyed by heat, but they can't be destroyed by just water bathing. The heat isn't hot enough, basically. So you have to preserve it by raising the heat. And this is what the pressure canner is for. It's not the same as a pressure cooker, because the pressure cooker doesn't get to the necessary temperature, which, with a glance at my notes, is 116 degrees centigrade, because boiling water is 100 degrees. So if we want to preserve meat, things like vegetables, I've got a long list here, casseroles, fruits, poultry, soup, sauces, all those kinds of things, we need to deal with it in a different way. It is more involved, and planning is the key. It's not something you can just think, oh, you know, like I've said before, you can make some jam in half an hour, done. This is a lot more involved, and I think the way to go about it is to plan ahead and plan it into your life, and then you can forget about it until your stocks diminish, or you get another bargain, or you get another glut from the garden. So if you manage to do the pressure canning and preserve the food, things like meat, I'll show you in a bit what the sort of things you can do. They're good for at least a year, but most home canners will keep their food for a lot longer than that. It can be 3 to 4 years. There may be some deterioration in colour, but it doesn't mean that the food's unsafe. As long as you follow the processes as laid down, and when you put things away and store them, you're confident that they've been done properly. So it all hinges on the pH level of the foods you're trying to preserve. And above 4.6, which goes into the alkaline spectrum, you need to be pressure canning. Now, I don't expect everybody to have pH testers. I mean, I haven't got a pH tester. There are better people than me that have come before me that have made comprehensive lists and very reliable recipes. And I've said before, the pressure canning book that I use, which is the Complete Guide to Pressure Canning by Diane Devereaux, who is an American, is easy to follow and is very straightforward. And there's all sorts of recipes in there that you can adapt. Now, you may think, I'm going to pressure can a particular foodstuff that you know is high in acid. Well, why do I need to pressure can it? If you're going to make it into a meal and combine it with other things, then that will alter the pH. So you can't just rely on a sort of gut instinct. What I've done all the way through is to find a similar recipe because, you know, with the best one in the world, the food available and the style of food is slightly different in the different countries, but you can usually find a recipe that approximates to a family favorite that you can then follow to make what you particularly like. So it comes down to very good hygiene when you're going to be canning the food. You need to be scrubbing any vegetables that you're going to leave the skin on or anything like that, fruits, that kind of thing. Make sure you handle meat and poultry very well. And we're not advised to wash it these days like we used to with poultry, but just have a mind of, you know, where things are and what you're touching and that kind of thing. And you should be fine, absolutely fine. So there are only a few things that you can't successfully pressure can. And weirdly, it's things like mashed potato, because it's very, very dense and the heat doesn't transfer through it that thoroughly. It's much better in that instance to chop up things like potatoes and can cubes of it in water, and then you can heat it up, drain it and mash it when you want to serve it. And people do things like that quite a lot of it. I haven't actually personally done potatoes because I tend to have a bag, you know, a large bag that I keep. But you know what it is. If you buy one of those large bags, there's sometimes the bottom third starts to sprout, where you can get peeling and you can can them if you want to. But it's that kind of thing. We do pressure canning to ultimately save us time. And that's probably the most key thing to most people these days. Hot on the heels is saving money. So you can take advantage of bargains. You can take advantage of things you've grown. And you can also not waste things. You can cook them into dishes, or you can just cook them as they are. And the beauty of doing pressure canning is you don't have to add preservatives. You can dry can things by just putting meat into a jar, chopped up chicken, for instance, and put nothing else, and it will sort of can in its own juices. Or you can cover things with water, or you can use salted water, or you can use a syrup if you want to for fruits. So it makes it very, very versatile if you've got people in one family that want and need different diets, for instance. You can sort of cook one thing and can something that doesn't have gluten in it, or, you know, all that kind of thing. Although gluten isn't a very good example because you don't thicken things before they're canned. You thicken them when you're going to reheat to serve, because it doesn't travel well, any kind of flour or thickener in a canned product. But you can accommodate if you've got 2 or 3 people in a family with different diets. You know, you can mix and match your recipes. The trouble is with going back to the bacteria with the Clostridium spores, that they proliferate in an oxygen-free, an anaerobic environment. So, and that's when they multiply and produce botulism, which is the thing that we want to avoid. Now, when you're canning things, when we make jam, for instance, like last week when we did the water bathing, we're driving out the air. We had the cold cordial in the bottles with the air gap at the top, and we drove that air out by expanding the cordial and driving it out, sealing it, and then it sank back, and there was a vacuum at the top. The problem with that is that is exactly the environment that the Clostridium spores love and can proliferate in. And the only way to kill them off is to raise the temperature. So then they can't then form the botulism that is the result of the spores. So because you're not using any other kind of preservative and you're not using any added acid like lemon juice or vinegar, that's the whole scenario. You've got low acid vegetables or meat or whatever, no preservative and no air, no oxygen, and it's the ideal situation. But can it properly at the right temperature and it should be fine. If it isn't fine, if for some reason you've kind of missed out a step or you haven't, done one of the processes or whatever, then you'll soon know about it when you open the jar. You'll be able to see, that there's something wrong with it and you won't go further and eat it. So let's have a look at the canner, which is this big beast. It's made of aluminium. It's a 23 quart capacity, which again is because they're made in America, it's in imperial measurements. So 23 quarts is about 50 pints, which is going to be about 25-ish litres, I suppose, roughly speaking. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I'm just giving you some sense of the size. And when it's closed in and working, the handles will be like this, lined up, and it twists round like that. And you'll see when I take the lid off, it's got these lugs all the way around. And you fit it, the lid on. There's a V on here, a V on the top of the lid, and you need to okay, because I'm not in front of it. To do this. Far out. There we go. So now the V is there, and the V is there lined up. It says close and open there. So when you've got it loaded up with all your jars inside, you can then shut it, and that's how it will be put onto the heat source. I've put it on my hob here. You can use a gas hob. This basic one is not suitable for induction. When I bought mine, there weren't induction models. Glass top stoves, it will work on, but you've got to be careful that the base doesn't scratch anything. That's the thing with that. So let's take this off again for the moment. And inside, I mean, this is a bit battle scarred, mine, and a bit sort of discoloured looking because I've used it a lot. So it's not out of the box or anything. So you can see it's just a big cavity with the aluminium inside, and then you get a canning rack which has got little feet pressed into the metal, which you put those down on the base, and then you put all of your jars onto the canning rack. You don't put them straight onto the base of the unit, because they will get very, very hot and they could crack. We'll look at the canning jars next week when we look at all the jars, but you know from other things I've said, you can have the 2-part lids or you can have the clip top. You can use either, and there are ways to decide which is best, which I will talk about in a moment. You can fill this about 2/3 full. So generally speaking, if you're using the 500 ml size jar, you can get 2 layers. If you're regularly going to put 2 layers in, then I suggest you buy another canning rack and put on top of the first layer of jars to give the top layer a smooth base to stand on. The books do say you can offset them and stand them in, but they do sort of move around a bit in the processing, and you don't want things to fall over and break or anything like that. So going back to the lid, you can see there's a gauge on the front here, which tells you the operating pressure. You put the lid on, which I'll have another go at. It's only because I'm sort of stood onto it. That's it. So you put that on. You turn on the heat, you put some water in, you have to put 3 quarts, which is 2.8 litres of water in. It doesn't matter how many jars you've got in there, you put in 2.8 litres, okay? And if you're canning cold, if you've got a cold soup, for instance, maybe you've made a soup and it's cooled and it's cold, you put cold ingredients into cold jars, into a cold canner in cold water. If you're canning hot, it's the opposite. Hot food into hot jars, into hot water, and then close the canner, and so that nothing gets shocked, nothing has the opportunity to break because of thermal shock or anything like that. So on here, we've got, this is probably the most important thing, which is the gauge. And when you see the books that come, you get a little instruction book with it, which actually doesn't look very much, but it's actually very effective. And it gives you all the instructions in there. And you have a different pressure reading according to where you are in the world. So, but we don't have to worry. It goes up by the sort of sea level. So people who live a long way above sea level have to adjust their pressures and their timings. We don't have to worry about in the UK. We just use the standard, and most things are canned at 10 psi or 5 psi, depending on what it is, but we don't usually go up to a higher level. But again, I don't see there's any point in trying to memorize all of these things. You need to check it every time to make sure that you're getting it right. So arm yourself with a good book and stick to what it says. And then mostly I do mine at 10 psi for 75 minutes, and that's it. Most things are more or less the same because I cook for a particular routine. I'm not experimenting, I'm not trying all different things, and I do it to save time, save money, and to not have any waste. Another book, when we sell our canners like this, we also provide the Home Canning Bible from the US the Drug Association. It's the university that have done all the research forever, and this is a free download available from their site. But when we sell the canner, to be responsible, we've done a download and we print off this, and it comes with the canner, just to make sure you've got chapter and verse on absolutely everything. So going back to this, on here, the next thing, when you put your lid on and you turned on your heat, you have to wait for this steam vent here to start venting steam, basically, so that you know that everything's heating up. And steam will come out of here. It's sometimes visible. You can hear it hissing. And if you're mad enough to put your hand over it, then you can feel how hot it is. But you only do that once, basically. And once it's doing that, you have to leave it for 10 minutes doing that. So you time it. It's great to get a good timer for this sort of work, because you do need to be timing things. So you vent it for 10 minutes, and that's to allow the ingredients in your jars, any trapped air that might be in there, to kind of, as it expands, it will bubble. And as I said in the water bathing, it will come out through the seals and come into the canner, but that needs to be vented. So you leave it for 10 minutes. Here we have a overpressure steam plug. That's just a rubber plug, and that's a safety valve. Doesn't look much, but should the canner over pressurize and you haven't noticed for whatever reason, this will fly out and the pressure will be released and it will all calm down. And obviously you have to switch it all off and start again, but it's a fail safe, basically. It's never happened with me. So in the with the steam vent, obviously you don't want all the steam coming out all of the time because you won't have any water left. So once it's vented for 10 minutes, you put on the overpressure valve, which is just a metal valve which goes over the top, and it just does this. It jiggles about, and what it does is, when it gets up to temperature, it will start to move around, and it just slightly releases the pressure if necessary. There's also here, which says top on it, and this is the locking mechanism for the pressure canner. So once all the steam's getting up to pressure, this will pop up, which locks it, which means you can't accidentally open it while it's under pressure, because it's sort of like tampering with a bomb. You know, you don't want to be doing that. You shouldn't open it until it's finished heating and it's all calmed down. Once that drops back down like that, you can open the canner. Now, there's one problem with this, is that you have to be here with it constantly, watching this gauge. If you're doing a lot of pressure canning, it's a tad boring, really, because you have to make sure you keep the gauge on the 10, around about the 10 psi, and you keep turning the heat down, turning it up. You know, for 75 minutes, it's quite tiring. So what most people do is to replace this. It's called a jiggler, by the way, because of the noise it makes. And we buy a 3-part jiggler, and each one of these is a 5 pounds. It doesn't weigh 5 pounds, but it's different weights. So that will keep it at 5 pounds psi. Put a weight on, and that will keep it at 10. Put the other weight on, and it will keep it at 15. And that definitely jiggles about and releases the steam automatically to keep it at the weight that you put on there. So I tend to use the 2 weights at 10 psi, and then I can leave it, not unattended, but I don't have to. I used to sit on a chair, literally sit on a chair and watch it, you know, for the processing time. Well, you know, you can be doing other things in the kitchen. Obviously, you don't do this, you know, when you haven't got time. This is why I say you have to plan ahead for what you're going to make. And I suggest that you plan ahead to make sure that you make enough of it. You want to have a session and think, right, I'm going to, I mean, what I do every week is order a bulk out of my farm box. You know, all know that by now that I have a farm box. So like this weekend, I've ordered some mince, some sausage meat, and the other things I need. Excuse me. And I'm going to make a big pan of bolognese sauce, and then I will pressure can it. That's it, done. Okay, we'll return to that in a moment. So it's not a thing you do just on a whim. You need to plan ahead. You need to know that you've got enough jars. You especially need to know that you've got enough seals. If you're using the metal seals on the jars, they're going to need replacing every time. So you need to get into the habit of making sure you've got all of the things that you need, including the time to actually get the job done, including the preparation, the cooking of anything, and the processing. I know it seems quite a long time to be processing something, but when I show you what I have here and how I use it, then I think you'll see that it's worthwhile, depending on your lifestyle, of course. What I'm finding at the moment with all of the terrible things that are happening around us, I'm thankful that I do this, because whatever happens, we have prepared. And we've been doing that seriously for the past probably 7 years. And now it's a way of life. And once things start to get down, then I'll think, oh, well, I'll make that this weekend, or I'll make something else. You know, it's just becomes a way of life. So I'm going to put this back on there. It does overhang, but it's absolutely fine. I need to try and get it centered. And when you've finished your processing, as I said, you leave it to calm down, cool down, everything will revert to normal, and then you can open the canner and take out your jars, and then you will leave them untouched until they're cold, basically, generally overnight. And then you do the seal test, like I've said before. Now, last week when we were doing the water bathing with the plums, I said to you I would check the next day. And so with these sorts of jars, you undo that, you pull that, and if it won't open, it's sealed. End of. And those are the plums I did last week, water bathing. It's the same with this. You can check the seal like that, or like with this one, with the metal seal, when you're processing it, you have the screw band on. And I've got one in the drawer, I think. I've got the right size, probably not. So the Le Parfait come with a screw lid. And as with the water bathing, you do it up so that it's sort of finger tight. You process it, and then when it's cold, or when you take it out and you can handle it, you do it up, and then you leave it to get cold. And by tightening it, you're holding that seal down onto the jar. You can then take it, you don't test the jar when it's hot, don't pull the seal when it's hot. And then the next day you can take the lid off and check the seal, and then you store the jar without the lid. You label it and you store it. If you store it with the lid on, you can end up with broken jars, because if there's anything wrong with the processing and the gases build up in it, that seal will be blown off. And okay, there'll be a mess, but it won't be broken glass everywhere. We'll talk more about the jars and their attributes and everything next week, because there's a lot to take in. And I think if you have all that as well, it's going to be quite a lot to absorb. So, move my plums out of the way. They were just demonstration. Now, some of the tools that you might find useful come in these kits, or you can buy the individual elements. But the kit's good if you're going to do a lot, because it's all there in the kit. You don't have to look for it, because some of the things are quite hard to find in this country. We import the canners in, and we also do the kits and everything so that you can get them easily. The most essential kit is what I've used before, which is the jar lifter. So you just, if you're going to lift them out while they're hot, just hold the jar tightly, squeeze the handles together, and you can lift it out safely without burning yourself. By far and away the most useful. The next I would say is the wide neck funnel to go in the jars, because it saves a lot of cleaning up, because the one thing that you must have before you put the seal on is a clean jar. You don't have to sterilize anything because it's sterilized in the heating process, so don't go through all the effort of, you know, sterilizing and all that kind of thing. Some people put the seals in hot water, boiling water, but the jars, if you're going to jar things up hot, then it's good to warm them so they're not shocked, but you don't have to sterilize it. So you get a wide neck funnel, and then you get this sort of paddle, which has two uses. You may be able to see right on the end. I think it's on that side, yeah. There's different measurements, and that's for the headspace. You have to leave room for the food to expand in the jar, and there's all sorts of headspaces, but mostly they're an inch, which is about 3 centimeters. So this helps you, you can put that in whichever one you want it to be, and it measures it for you. And the other end you use to poke the contents about, to get any air out as much as possible, because you don't want all that expanding in the jar. It would potentially lead to siphoning, where the contents come out through the seal. We've got a jar seal lifter. There's a magnet on the end there, and if you have put them into boiling water, you can put this in and lift them out safely without burning your fingers. Similarly, some tongs if you want to move hot meat or anything that you need tongs for, basically comes in the kit. And also another jar lifter there. I find these the better ones to use though. So that's the tools you'll need, the equipment. That's really it. I think you'll need some labels to label up. You need to do that as you go along. You know, it's hopeless thinking you'll remember. You need a date, so I put on just the month and the year, and then I make a note of when I should use it by, and generally speaking, I give myself 2 years to use things up. So let's have a look at what we have under our table here, which is where I store all my preserved food. I think my lovely assistant is going to go along with the camera. And I'll just show you, this is the sort of more of a hodgepodge area. Mostly up here is passata, all the different sizes of passata. There are some rogue jars around that haven't got a home, so they get put where there's a gap. But this is mostly passata, and you can see all the different sizes of jars I do, so that it depends what I'm going to use it for as to which ones I use, of course. And then these, that's some more passata there.
And these are some vegetables, more passata. I do masses of passata, and these are litre bottles. These are water bath, though. They are not done in the pressure canner. Moving on, I've got different fruits, apple strudel, chunks of apple. I've got plums. I think there's some rhubarb left, lots more apples because we've got 2 apple trees. Oh yeah, rhubarb and orange down there that we're going to make next season. So go around the corner. Yeah, just slightly more sort of organised. I've got ratatouille, I've got minestrone soup. The bottles there are different soups. Chicken and mushroom. Now, it doesn't look glorious, but the chicken and mushroom is in there, and that will be used in a cobbler, or it might be made into a curry. I like to pressure can ingredients that I can then make meals with, and I'll demonstrate that in a moment. This is, see what I mean? You can't rely on looking at it. So this is cassoulet in there, which is a meal in a jar. I can just empty that into a casserole and put in the oven, or heat it in a saucepan. This is swede and butternut squash cubes, which I will then put into a pan, reheat and mash. I love swede, but we rarely have it because by the time you prepped it all, chopped it all, cooked it, mashed it, you kind of lose the will to live. And then you, generally speaking, end up with too much for 2 of you. So like this, I've done it in jars that will be just enough for 1 meal. Down here, I've got some game casserole, baked red cabbage. I know there's some mushroom soup in there somewhere. This is curried parsnips and sweet potato soup. This is plain chicken. Now, this is done just without liquid. That's dry canned. So I've put the plain chicken in. There's no seasoning, no nothing. And you can see the water in there that's come out of it, the juices. So that is good to go for anything. I can make any chicken dish out of that. And at the top, I've got homespun pork and beans, which is chunks of pork with beans. But pressure canning for bean dishes is very good indeed, because of course you can get problems with toxins from dried beans, but the canning process helps to deal with that. I've got lots of bolognese sauce. Oh, there's a mushroom soup in there, and that is delicious, absolutely delicious. I know it doesn't look like Campbell's or Heinz or whatever, but it's full of flavour, all trapped in the jar. Right, so let's take the bolognese sauce. This is what I'm going to be making this weekend. This is what I've made before, and I have got lots of jars of it. Now, if I wanted to if we have people here, I would open 2 or 3 jars, depending. Let me just I can show you why I make things that are versatile. I call it bolognese sauce, but it's just a mince mixture with some of the passata, some herbs. It might have carrots in it, chopped up, celery, or I've got some dehydrated celery pieces, I might put those in. And I probably, because I've got quite a bulk of meat, I tend to put it in the slow cooker with some red wine and let it just, and some garlic and all that sort of thing, and just let it cook slowly. But the actual canning recipe for a bolognese sauce is actually quite quick. You cook it quickly, and all the processing goes on in the sort of 75-minute processing time. So let's put that there in the middle. And we come home from work, we want a meal. Oh, if you've got things in the freezer, they're frozen, you haven't taken it out to defrost or whatever, you can go along the shelf, you think, right, I've got some bolognese there, you can have it with some pasta, done.
By the time you've cooked the pasta, the bolognese is heated up, and there's a meal in probably 15 minutes that you know is home cooked. There's nothing in it that you don't want to be in it, and it's good and tasty. You might not fancy pasta. You might want some rice with it, and add a tin of chili beans, and you've got a chili. There's the passata. You could add some more passata in to make more of a sauce, or you might not want that. You might fancy a cottage pie. So we've got some carrots, some potatoes, and there's the swede and butternut squash, which you could mash either on its own or mash it with potato and put on the top and put it in the oven and cook the carrots and maybe some broccoli or something like that. So that's all done. Great, come in from work, ready to go. Or you might want to make lasagna with it, which you can do. Slightly more involved. Layered with the lasagna, make a bechamel sauce. What I prefer to do though, I don't usually use this for lasagna, because in the freezer I have Ziploc bags flattened with the mincemeat mixture in it, in the size of the casserole. And that all sounds very, you know, but believe me, if you do it when you make it, you then have it to go. So you can take the mince out frozen. I've got the bechamel sauce done in the same way. You can layer it up in the dish and put it in the oven, grate some Parmesan on the top of it or something like that. And if you flatten everything that you put into the freezer and obviously label it, you then maximize the room. All these sort of round bags of things, or Tupperware boxes or ice cream boxes or whatever, take up a massive amount of room. I've got a drawer freezer in here, a chest freezer at work where it's slightly more forgiving of odd shapes. And then we have another freezer in the garage, a small one that we keep fish in so that, you know, we don't get everything smelling of fish. So the one in here needs to work very, very efficiently, and layering up in Ziploc bags is great. And then you can just layer it frozen, put it in the oven. By the time you've sat down and got your thoughts together, then it's ready. So that one day of prepping your, like I'm going to do this weekend, prepping your mince sauce. I won't keep calling it bolognese. That's how I think of it in my head. But it's versatile. You can add things into it to change it, and it's good to go. It's shelf stable, no power required to store it. And the way we're going now in this country and around the world, to be able to store whole meals, part meals, fruit, whatever, at ambient temperature, good to go with no, the cost is in just processing it. Once it's done, then the cost of storage ends. You do have to find the storage. I'm not saying that that isn't, you know, something you've got to think about, but make room for it and get organized and plan ahead. Do you have a question? I do, so Tracy's asking if the meats are generally raw when I pressure cooker. Sometimes the chicken tends to be, the bolognese not, the casserole's not. I use slow cooker because then I can just chuck it all in there and again forget about it. I don't have to sort of babysit it. I can come back, have this ready, heating up. I can put it into hot jars, seal it up, put it in, put my jiggler on the top and come back and it's done. And this is the mindset to be in. Things like vegetables and that don't take quite so long. You know, that's where your book comes in. I don't profess to know all the timings and the pressures. As I say, it's not information I can efficiently, reliably carry around in my head. I would prefer to look it up every single time because it is safer. You will get it right and not waste food, because you don't want things not keeping because you haven't done it properly, and you don't want things not sealing because then you either have to reprocess them, which is a real pain, or you have to use them. So you want to get it right and give yourself a chance. And I still, after 15 years, give myself that chance. I almost deliberately don't learn all of the timings and everything because, or what should be processed in what way, because then I have to look it up and get it right. What I'll do though is I'm using my Pantry notebook, and I talked to you the other day about I was going to do meal planning pages, which I've done, and they're on the website. But let's go back to the store cupboard pages. I've got lists in here of all the things that I've got in my store cupboard. So I know what I've got. If it's low, I put, let me find one. I put buy beside it. I've got the date up here. I put buy. And then when I'm making up my lists for shopping, which is almost exclusively done online because of my health situation, I can go through and think, oh, I need to get those. And all my dry goods and sugar and things like that come from one company online. And then, you know, the farm boxes with the meat and the veg and all that kind of thing. But these are stores. So I've got all the different things I've got in there, all the different types of drink. Now, you may not need to be this detailed, but it keeps it in your head. I sit down with my farm box order, and I may have a recipe book beside me that I look up and think, now what, I fancy making that, what do I need? And I get it right. I might double the recipe or triple the recipe, but if you've got it there, you can do it. But if I fill this out from time to time, then I know what I have and what I might need to get. But I've got a pretty comprehensive store cupboard, although it's not all in one place. So moving on through, these are the pages that I've done for the meal planner. So I think this is, I found this, I thought, oh, I need a saying, I need some sort of motto. And I went on the internet, and this is the first thing I saw. And I just thought it was just waiting for me. For every minute spent organising, an hour is earned. And that couldn't be more true. As I'm saying, it takes a while to get your head around it, set it up, and be organised. And people may think you're nitpicking and, oh, you know, you're boring because it's all. But I'm all about saving time. My time is very precious to me because every minute that I can save means I can be gardening, because that's what I love to be. I love to be outside. And so if I've got everything organised and I know when I come in, dinner is there, and, you know, or I'll say to Trev, you know, this is what we're having for dinner, and he can do it, which he's very good at. I feel calm because I'm not sort of thinking, oh gosh, what should we have? You don't fall back on ready meals, which are ultra processed food with all sorts of chemicals in. If necessary, these can just be processed either in their own juice, like the chicken, or just plain water, and they will be safe. So you aren't taking in things that you don't want to. So this is my book, my pages on meal planning. I explain what I do, why I do it, and then you start, I suggest, with a meal planning questionnaire. It's only that page. And before you start thinking about what you're going to process, you need to examine what you need. So how many are you providing for routinely? And that will govern the size of the jars that you buy. It's no point buying small jars if there's a family of 6, for instance. I mean, you'll need a few small jars, but mostly you're going to need bigger jars. Do you all eat together? Do you need to buy special ingredients? When is the best time to schedule in
preparation of bulk meals, maybe 2 to 3 sessions per month or 1 per week, which is mainly what I do, is 1 per week, because I get a weekly farm box, so it suits me. Do you have a slow cooker? Do you use it? What regular commitments do you need to factor into your meal planning? So what do you have to work around? Do kids have music lessons, or do you have a fitness class, or go swimming or something like that? So you plan when you get to the other questions. You need to plan around what your typical week is. It's no point trying to force the issue. If you've got a busy week, then you need to find time when you can perhaps do some meal prep. But once you've done that, that busy week becomes so much easier, because you're not trying to fit everything else around shopping and cooking every night. It's more reheating in our house, which suits us. So the shopping, buy better, buy local, buy less. If you make a combined shopping list and do it in one go, you'll save money, because mostly people like butchers and the refill centres where you can go and buy dry goods and things like that. If you give them a big order once a month, they'll probably give you, a better price. And that money, when you spend it locally, stays local. The people that you're interacting with are local people. And no, they're not a big conglomerate that's got to go send the money off to, a head office or somewhere abroad. They're local people, and they're going to pay for their daughter's ballet classes with it, or their own food shopping, whatever. That money benefits the community then, because you're all helping each other. There's quite a lot. I won't go through every bit. So I've said how I shop and how I combine things, which you can use as a basis, or you can just say, well, we don't live like that, but it makes you think, what do you do? I've put the suppliers I use regularly here and why I use them. And a bit about delivery costs. It's no good balking at those. People have got to get it to you, and that's going to cost something. But there again, I'm not spending my time that I could be gardening driving all round to different shops, spending time in there. And the thing that drives me mad is the trolley. You go and find a trolley, you go and fill it up, you empty it onto the conveyor belt, you put it back in the trolley, you take it to the car, you put it out of the trolley into the car. And when you get home, you do it all again. And it just does my head in. So the delivery costs, you need to factor those in, but they, generally speaking, are modest. They are appropriate. That people do not use delivery costs as a profit center, in my experience, and we don't when we're delivering things to people. It costs what it costs, and when you think what they do for it, it's incredible. And to be honest, we've been doing this for 15 years. And frankly, the delivery costs have hardly gone up at all. It's always around about the £6, £7 an order for one box or something, So, and a lot of people, like the farm box, if you spend over a certain amount of money with them, the delivery is free. But of course, it's not free to them, but they're able to cost it in and provide the delivery. So the conclusion here is to grow as much as is practical for you. Try not to eat processed food, and then compare prices with the supermarket. And when I don't mean go and think, oh, that bottle of juice is so much and I can get it in the supermarket for less. You have to factor in, again, your time spent doing it, traveling to the supermarket, going to the coffee shop and maybe having, a coffee and a piece of cake, multiplied by however many people you have with you in the supermarket. And if you've got children with you, it's going to cost. Then you've got all the shopping and all the extras that you're seduced into buying because they're there and they're on offer or you fancy it. And then if you get out without buying any clothes or home items or they don't have CDs now, but all that peripheral stuff, cost that in. How much are you spending that you don't need to spend?
you know, and that has to be accounted for. Right. Oh, get it done. Don't be a martyr. Get the family involved. If it's appropriate and they're older youngsters, they can help with the food preparation day when you're going to be processing, because they will understand then, you know, when it's dished up, what has happened to it, why they've done it, and they'll be that much more receptive to eating it, hopefully. If they're younger children, you can get them making their labels and labeling things up, all that kind of thing. You know, don't be there sort of, oh, I've got all this to do. Unless you prefer that. You might want to get on and everybody goes out doing their thing and you want to do what you're doing. Got the weekly meal planner here, so I do it weekly. If you were doing a monthly shop, you do all the meals for the 4 weeks or 5 weeks, however many it is. You don't have to stick to it, but believe me, if you've got something down, I've only put lunch and dinner because breakfasts tend to be on the hoof these days and everybody does their own thing. But lunches, dinners, if you have to do packed lunches, that kind of thing, if you've got something written down, you're much calmer about it. You might swap the days around when it comes to it. You might not fancy it when it comes to it. But the fact that you've got something there, you aren't facing this blank sort of, oh, what should we have? What should we do? It takes a while to fill it out, but it supports you in your everyday life. So that's the meal planners, and then there's a shopping list: vegetables, fruit, meat, dairy, bread, baked goods and dry goods. What do I need to buy? I've got to translate my dry goods into here because I've been looking in my cupboard and making a list, but I haven't done that yet. But this is the inventory. So when I make things and I store them, I put in what I've made, how many I've got, where it is, when I've made it, and when I should use it by. And I put the sizes in as well, so I know how many of a certain size I've got left. So if I turn to this page, you can see here the curried parsnip and sweet potato soup that I've just made. I've got 4 at 500 ml. It's under the table. I made it in February and I need to use it by 2024. And then I've got 1 which is 750 ml. So put that on, and when you use it, fill it out in pencil, then you can adjust it. Or you can do a spreadsheet on your computer if you want to. We've just done these pages as a download. So you can download the meal planner and the shopping list and also the inventory pages as a spreadsheet, and you can do it on your computer. I quite like sitting and writing it out because I know, you know, in my head, I do enough on computers. It's quite nice to sit on the sofa with a pile of 2 or 3 recipe books and this and the plan and get it all done in one session. Then I can do my orders for the things that I need. So that's just an overview of what I do. As I say, your life will be different to mine, but it's a guide. It's a signpost, if you like. Then try it this way, and you'll modify it for your own things that you need and your own families. You might need to cook for an elderly relative. Oh, I wish somebody one day a child will arrive at my door with a meal they've made for me, maybe. But, you know, it's all different. It's no good setting it in stone. But although it seems daunting, it's well worth it to have that reassurance. And as we're finding now, you know, every day when we watch the news, I'm not saying that, you know, if you're in a war-torn area, you can take all your food with you. But leading up to that point, and the people who have had to stay put have stores and can use them. And like I said before, in America or Australia, where they have really colossal storms to deal with, you know, hurricanes and all that kind of thing, where they might be indoors, they might be in their basement for 2 or 3 weeks. They've got everything down there. And a lot of people pressure can water and things like that so that they've got clean water to drink, and then they store other water in containers that they can use for washing and that kind of thing. So nothing's off limits. It's just about everything can be preserved, can be processed in some way. And the things that you can't make as preserves in jars, you can preserve with dehydration and cover the ground that way. Because things like milk, you can't, it needs to be pasteurized at a much higher temperature, and you can't achieve that with home canning. So the way to cover the ground in an emergency is to have dried milk. Excuse me. But that's a sort of an overview. It is a big subject, and what we'll do as we work through the seasons, pressure canning the different food groups, are talking more detail about their specifics. This is just an overview for today, and food for thought, very much food for thought. I don't know if there are any other questions, not at the moment. So we're coming up to time. So if you have any questions that you feel I can answer, then ask them. And next week we'll talk about jars. You wouldn't think there'd be that much to say about jars, would you? But we do jars, all the different sorts of jars, the different sorts of lids, why you use one jar as opposed to another, you know, all the reuse of them and recycling and all that kind of thing. And then we're good to go for the rest of the year. We'll be armed with our information and be able to make much more effective use of what we have available wherever we find it or buy it. That's the aim. So I hope you've enjoyed that and found it useful. And we'll come back next week and talk about jars. See you then.